With Xfinity XFi's powerful and reliable connection, I'm able to help with wedding planning.
Aww. I'm monitoring my shipments. I don't know why anyone would take a half-court shipment.
I'm definitely not watching basketball, though. Not doing that.
Hello and welcome to a special March Madness edition of Inquirer Live, presented by Xfinity. I am Philadelphia Inquirer sports columnist David Murphy, coming to you live from South Philadelphia, where in just a few hours, the East Regional semifinals will tip off, and 4 more teams tonight will stamp their tickets to the Elite Eight. But with all due respect to St. Peter's and Purdue and UCLA, right now, the talk of the town, the Villanova Wildcats. And we're going to bring in Mike Sielski and Mike Jensen from San Antonio, where last night they watched the Wildcats stamp their tickets to the Elite Eight with a 63-55 win over the Michigan Wolverines. Mike Jensen, Mike Sielski, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having us, Murph.
Great to see you guys. Where are you right now? You're in the Alamo Dome?
We are underneath the Alamo Dome. We're actually not that far from the court. Just off a little media work area.
We're actually in the AT&T Center, not the Alamo Dome. We wanted to get in the basement of the Alamo, but they wouldn't let us in there.
I don't know if we're allowed to say AT&T Center on Inquirer Live, presented by Xfinity, but so be it. So what do you guys, Mike Jensen, let's start with you. You're our college basketball expert, our longtime senior college basketball writer. This Villanova team entered the tournament as a second seed, and that would tell you that they are exactly where they were supposed to be. Anything you see last night surprise you? Anything about where the Wildcats are right now, 1 game away from the Final Four, surprise you?
No, actually, Villanova, as you said, has kind of played through the tournament about what you expected. Played their kind of ball. You saw it to kind of the last 3-point dagger by Gillespie, where he was real slow, 3-4 dribbles around, and a veteran guard for Michigan took one slow step around a screen, and that boom 3-pointer. That's what Villanova does. So maybe the surprise, but not really, is the opponent. Houston knocked out Arizona, except Houston was in the Final Four last year. Houston gives every sort of problem to Villanova. So, but the path has been not a surprising path.
Well, I mean, obviously the question on everybody's mind, Mike Sielski, will Villanova win it all again?
I think they can, but I think Mike's point is well taken about the opponent right in front of them. Houston really took it to the number 1 seeded Arizona Wildcats last night. They play, a brand of defense that is, just relentless. And they're bigger than Nova in a lot of respects. They're kind of, as Mike alluded to, the kind of team that will give Nova trouble. That doesn't mean that Nova can't win this game. I think it does mean, though, that if the Wildcats do win this game, boy, they're in pretty good shape because, they won't face the number 1 seed coming out of, maybe I'm wrong about that. I don't know. Jensen can correct me on this. It might be Kansas, I guess, who's the last number 1 left, who they might face in the national semifinals. But this has a chance to be their toughest game remaining. And if they're able to get by Houston, then their chances of winning another national championship are pretty decent.
Yeah, Houston Villanova on Sunday it will be, or Saturday?
Saturday.
And you think this might be their toughest matchup remaining?
They're all tough at this point. Kansas certainly presents all sorts of problems. What Houston does is present stylistic problems where they're going to be absolutely hitting, defending the 3. Villanova needs to hit 3s. Houston's opponents have not been hitting 3s. Villanova needs to keep Houston off the offensive glass because they're relentless there, taking their own misses back. So Villanova guards, they're a pretty good rebounding team for guards. That'll be a big factor in the game. There's a website. It's all data. KenPob.com is kind of the Bible of the sport when it comes to analytics. They actually give Houston a 57% chance of winning this game, 43% for Villanova. So this is no little joyride 40 minutes. This is the test.
So where does this Villanova team rank with regards to the Final Four teams of years past? 2 national championship teams in the last 6 tournaments, I believe. If you look at the talent anyway, and you look at kind of the NBA level talent that was on those last 2 Villanova teams, you really don't see it this time around. What has been the key to their success, and is that fair to say that this team is less talented than those?
No, I think that's fair, Murph. Of the 3 Final Four teams that Jay Wright has had, I think this potential one is probably most comparable to the 2009 team, which had NBA talent on it, but didn't have any players you would consider lottery picks, right? In 2016, you had, Josh Hart, who has been a terrific NBA player, very solid NBA player. You had Ryan Arcidiacono, who's a player in the league. That 2018 team that kind of rolled to the championship, you had Jalen Brunson and Dante DiVincenzo and Mikal Bridges, who is an outstanding player for the Phoenix Suns. This team doesn't have that kind of top-end talent, but it does have a ton of experience. You have 2 graduate students in Colin Gillespie and Jermaine Samuels, 2 guys who are each in their 5th year at Villanova and playing for Villanova. Thank you to the NCAA changing the standards on that because of COVID and the pandemic, but it's a very experienced team. It's not particularly deep because that's not how Jay Wright tends to coach. I mean, he goes 7, 8 deep maybe throughout a tournament, but it's very tough. It's very seasoned. Villanova is, as Mike kind of alluded to earlier, they're the team you don't want to face in this tournament. And I'm sure Houston, for all the talk we've had about how difficult it will be for the Wildcats to beat Houston, and that's all true, I don't think Houston's looking at Villanova and saying, oh, okay, well, we're just going to roll over them, because nobody really does.
Yeah, this Villanova team doesn't have to beat the 2018 or the 2016 team. They've got to beat Houston. And they got Colin Gillespie, who is not a lottery pick, but he's an All-American. Whether he's first, second, or third team All-American is debatable. Let's say he's third team, one of the top 15 players in the country, which means he's one of the top 5 players left in this tournament. I actually hit up a scouting director, a college scouting director for an NBA team this morning, because I had written about Gillespie as a pro prospect a couple of years ago, and I hit up 4 scouts, and they all had him as a legit pro prospect, not as a first-round draft choice, none of them, but as a guy who could make a team with a path of 2-way contracts, maybe G League, maybe he gets on a team right away. And so I asked him this year, I said, okay, he's older and wiser. What does that mean for his path? And he said, doesn't see him being drafted. He said that would be a good thing for him. So he could pick his spot, pick his team, find the right contract. And I said to the scout, so more of an Ryan Arcidiacono path than a Jalen Brunson path. And he said, exactly.
But I mean, to your point, and to 2 of those names that you just talked about, and testament to the program that Jay Wright has built here, Villanova seems like it's almost the anti-Duke when it comes to talent. I mean, it seems like every one of these guys consistently outperforms their draft slot or their pre-NBA projection. I mean, you look at Mikal Bridges, you look at Brunson right now. I mean, Brunson's averaging 32 minutes a night for a team that has Luka Doncic on it, Pascal. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I've written columns on how the Sixers had just valued Villanova players who play a lot of home games, the Wells Fargo Center, appropriately. They would have had a deeper rotation.
If the Sixers had done a lot of things, they would have. But in all honesty, I'll say this: as someone who has not watched Villanova nearly with the expert side that you 2 have this year, I was blown away by Jay Wright's coaching job down the stretch. Now, again, maybe it was just because it was contrasted with Jawn Howard's coaching job, but can we all agree a higher percentage shot in college basketball is a pull-up 3 rather than the quick 2? I mean, come on, how many times on the court last night did Michigan need the possession game and settled for a contested 2 over a pullback 3? But what you saw was consistently, I think, Michigan crumble in tight spaces and Villanova execute where executing was needed. And is that fair to say that Jay Wright has really this has been Jay Wright's tournament so far?
Boy, that's a big ask since there all sorts of things are happening. It's a St. Peter's tournament. It's an Arkansas tournament. So not going that far, but to your point, and it's a valid one, these are all Gillespie's fifth-year guy, Samuel's fifth-year guy. I mean, Dixon is in his third year of college, second year of college basketball. Slater's in his fourth year of college basketball. Caleb Daniels transfer from Tulane. He's either in his fourth or fifth year of college basketball. These guys are Justin Moore, third year guy who would have been the guy on this team if Gillespie had not come back with Samuels. So there's a lot of that. You can absolutely. Jay Wright has punched all sorts of right buttons. You saw it even at the very end of the Big East title game where Gillespie had hit a couple threes and cleared out the court, half the Madison Square Garden court for Justin Moore and let him go one-on-one. He trusts his guys to make the right decisions in those situations.
I would just say too, Murph, from kind of a bigger picture perspective, one of the things that longtime college basketball observers and fans kind of lament, or at least have in recent years in the modern game, is this idea that because players, and this is not to criticize these players for doing this at all, but because players generally don't stay as long at the universities, they're in a year or two and then they're declaring for the NBA draft. Villanova it seems like trying to reverse that trend all by itself. And I think that, as Mike said, that kind of lends itself to the kind of play that you're seeing, both the way that, the way that Jay kind of pinpoints who he wants to recruit and then develops those players once they're in his program. It's pretty amazing, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think I just always remember the perception. I think this was back before the 2 title wins. They had a couple of, I think, second round knockouts when they were either a 1 or a 2 seed. And there was kind of this perception that Jay Wright was, a good program builder, good recruiter, but, game day coach wise, it was up in the air. And I think, just from watching that game last night, I thought it was very clear who the better game day coach was in that one. And to your point, the program building speaks for itself. How does he do it? In the era of one and done, how does he get a team with graduate students, with, guys who are here 4 or 5 years, guys who, aren't hitting their peaks until they're, juniors and seniors, even guys who develop into NBA talents like Jalen Brunson, like Jensen. What is the secret sauce, and can it be replicated?
Well, it varies because Jalen Brunson was almost away from that, and that he was like a McDonald's All-American. But to your point, and it's dead on, is that it varies. One is that after they reached the 2009 Final Four, all of a sudden, a lot of really good players wanted them. And it's hard not to take those players. And as far as culture building, Jay Wright has been very specific. Like, it wasn't quite working. It was like, how do you not take this player? Well, you eventually found out why you didn't want that player. And they dipped. And it was getting interesting there. And I think there was one losing season in there, but then came back up, get his guys. Some of the secret sauce is because a guy like Brandon Slater, who he said to me, he did not understand. This culture was foreign in as far as you're used to just going and playing basketball, being the best basketball player on your team all the way through high school, summer teams. You show up, and he said he didn't play in the first scrimmage. They went to North Carolina. They had a scrimmage. I said, you didn't play at all? He said, no, 5 seconds at the end. They put the freshman in. And he said, you can sort of be told how it is. You can buy in. You can talk the talk. But he said to live it is really hard. And the way you do it is the guys ahead of you can say, hey, listen, this was my path. Mikal Bridges redshirted a year. Jay Wright kind of jokes like he wasn't even strong enough to really participate in practice. And Slater said, listen, I was going up against pros, so I had to adjust, every day in practice was the tough part. So, the culture that developed, it's we can't deny it. It's everyone in college basketball considers it the best culture in the sport now, but it's based on the success of it.
But Sielski, I guess, how does he just seems like he threads the needle. Take a guy like Brunson. So McDonald's All-America, wins a title his first year, but it's still here, still sticks around, and through his junior year. Now, part of that, I would assume, is what the NBA was saying about his draft status. But how does he? I mean, Josh, he finds these guys that are solid performers throughout their college careers, but actually have college careers and stick around. And is that guys like that wanting Villanova, or is that Jay Wright kind of being able to find these guys and prioritizing them over some of these one and dones?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think your point on the latter aspect is kind of right on. I asked Jay about this when we were in Pittsburgh last week, kind of contrasting his program at Villanova versus, let's say, Ohio State's, right? Because Ohio State is first and foremost thought of as a football school. So how does that dynamic affect who you go after and that sort of thing? And one of the things that Jay mentioned is you're looking for players. You're going to take any good player who wants to come to you and evaluate him kind of on his own, right? But you're kind of looking for players with what he described as like an East Coast basketball sort of way of thinking, right? They're in a conference now, the Big East, that is a basketball first conference. It had the 10 teams, now it has 11. At each of them, basketball is the number one priority in those athletic programs. You look at it geographically, some of the places that he taps into, the Maryland, Virginia, Southern Delaware, Washington, D.C. kind of area. You get a lot of DeMatha high school kids who come into Villanova. Josh Hart was from that region of the country. Ryan Arcidiacono is suburban Philadelphia. You get Philly area kids. There's a certain sensibility, I think, that Jay is looking for and figured out how to look for that is helping him sustain the program. And of course, as we kind of referenced earlier, you see the success stories of the players once they leave his program. You mentioned this, Murph, kind of outplaying where you thought they would be. One name we should mention is Sadiq Bey, who is suddenly, developed into a terrific player for the Detroit Pistons, just scored 51 points the other night. So I think all of it kind of...
Two and done, by the way.
Yeah, two and done. But all of it kind of feeds onto itself. The Jay has kind of figured some things out over time, who he's looking for, what kind of player he wants, why he wants them. And then those sorts of players start to see, okay, Villanova's a place I want to be.
Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead, Jensen.
Yeah, let me add this. The way you develop players is you develop the players. That just didn't happen by letting them hang around. I covered John Chaney for the last 10 years of his career. And I always said that John, he harped on very fundamental aspects of the game, basic footwork. He honed in on 5 things that you needed, and the guys just knew them to ad nauseum. Had to be sick of it by the end. But those happen to be the 5 things you need to be a pro, so that his guys who were ready for the league, they were ready to play in the league. They knew how to play. And there are more similarities between Chaney and Jay Wright than you'd think, not stylistically, but in terms of the basic coaching of the game. His guys, they come out ready. It doesn't mean they've come in ready. He's not like he's saying, boy, right, that guy can have footwork. I mean, an NBA scout remembers going to a practice Josh Hart's freshman year, and he's looking at this guy, like 6'5" inside guy, and it's like, as a scout, he's like, he told me, he said to Jay Wright, he's like, Josh Hart, it's like he can't play, and Jay's response was like, he'll be fine, and a year later he had a different role, and he kept adding to that role. By the end, he thought, I need to be a 3-and-D guy, and Jay Wright's like, no, that's not going to be your future, and it's not his NBA future. So he's able to identify these are the traits that you have and can build on, and that's not the case across all of college basketball.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting point. I'm sitting here looking at that 2016 roster, and Brunson was the only guy to come from outside of like a 200-mile radius around Philadelphia. You've got Josh Hart, Silver Spring, Chris Jenkins, Upper Marlboro, Arcidiacono, suburbs. You've got Phil Booth, Baltimore. You've got Achefu, Baltimore. Is there any other team in college? Jensen, this is probably a question for you. Is there any other team in college basketball right now that's kind of doing it the way Villanova is doing it? And just kind of Purdue might be one, tonight. But just kind of a regional power that's just dominating with guys, from an area like that.
I think the smart ones do it. They do it regionally. They understand that they have recruiting advantages to use them. The Texas schools, hit Texas, and Jay has talked about that. Like Mike said, he's not going into Big Ten territory too often. Brunson was an exception because his dad had played at Temple, so he actually has and was from upstate New York and Massachusetts. So he had East Coast roots. Villanova is perfectly situated to take advantage of the sort of, lower New England, right through New York and Jersey, down the East Coast. And Washington has been just talent rich the last 10 years. And with Georgetown not being there to really take advantage of it as a power, Villanova has.
So, I mean, handicap this thing right now to kind of steer it back to the present. We've got, I think, 4 teams in the Elite Eight right now, 4 more going tonight. Who right now is you said Ken Pom is giving Houston a 57% chance to win this game. I mean, who is the team right now with Arizona and Gonzaga, kind of the consensus top 2 seeds out of this thing?
Well, I think the favorite is clearly Duke because it's Mike Krzyzewski's last year. And if Duke doesn't win, then the entire ESPN, family will be heartbroken over this.
I wasn't aware it was his last year.
Sorry for the cynicism.
Even going into this season, there was no clear favorite. There was no, team like that 2018 Villanova team that was dominant. You looked at, could Gonzaga do it? Nope, Gonzaga can't do it. So this is not a surprise. Sometimes they say, oh, it's wide open, and you find out by the end, no, it wasn't. It's like they say a Kentucky Derby is wide open every year. Well, no, then somebody stomps through the field and wins the Preakness by 5 lengths, and you find out you just didn't know that was the horse. Well, this year it is that. The SEC is supposed to be having this terrible tournament, and they kind of were. It was just meant Kentucky and Auburn were having terrible tournaments and we're out. Now, another SEC team, Arkansas, just knocked out the number 1 overall seed of the tournament. So, it is, St. Peter's is not going to win the NCAA tournament. I'm not saying they can't win tonight. They're taking on a team that beat Villanova on a neutral court. Purdue has, 2 centers that share a position, and each one bigger than the other somehow. It'll be a very interesting game tonight for that. But other than them, I'm not counting anyone out. Mike says Duke's the favorite, and North Carolina went into Duke and took them out on their home court on Mike Krzyzewski Memorial Night at Cameron Indoor. This part will be very interesting. If you like a wide open tournament, I know you're going to make fun of my bracket at some point, but this is that.
We'll go easy on you. I think I entered 5 bracket pools, and I've got 2 of my 20 Final Four teams left, and I think they're playing each other. So go Providence.
This is why I don't do brackets.
Yeah, well, you're a smart man. You're too busy slinging books to be filling out brackets.
Hey, speaking of which, no, just kidding.
Order the rise now.
Yes.
You mentioned St. Peter's. Let's. It's a game that I'm going to tonight. St. Peter's, Purdue. I'll tell you what. I was up there on Tuesday, I guess it was, and man, these guys are small. They look like a high school team. I'm fascinated by this team. I still don't really understand how they beat Kentucky. Jensen, you're already on record as saying they will not win the national title. That's a bold prediction.
Boy, isn't it?
But what do you think about them against Purdue, and what do you think about what they've accomplished in this year's bracket? Kind of make some sense of it for me.
Can't make sense of it. That's the beauty of it. I fill out a bracket and instantly forget it. I don't carry it around to see if my pick's won because I don't want to know. I don't, because you just, as in human nature, you want to root for your bracket if you're really looking at it. And that's crazy to root for Kentucky against St. Peter's. The only reason I filled one out quickly was my daughter was running her office pool for her company and wanted one from me, and she instantly regretted asking me for it. And she said the only person in her entire office pool that had St. Peter's went to St. Peter's. They picked it for the logical reason, and that's the fun of this tonight. Let me put it this way: beating Purdue would be just as big an upset as beating Kentucky. They've got to double down on that. Murray State in between was an upset, but it was possible. This is doing the impossible again.
We have a comment from UM Bears, and I'll remind you that you can log on to inquirer.com/live and throw some questions at Jensen and Sielski if you've got any burning questions for our 2 college basketball experts. He says, he or she says, I want I want Gillespie to not try the pros. He needs to coach as soon as possible. He is the heir apparent to Jay Wright. I mean, that is galaxy brain stuff right there.
I think what we've got to ask Colin if he even wants to coach. That's number one. I don't think he's going to pass up a potential pro career just to be Jay Wright's heir apparent. But St. Petersburg, Kentucky, stranger things have happened.
I have asked Gillespie that question. Wrote about it from Big East Media Day because Jay Wright says, listen, he's a coach already on the floor, but Jay Wright was saying he doesn't want to coach. Well, I asked Colin, and he says, well, he wants to play as long as possible. He does not rule it out. He doesn't want to be thought of as that non-athletic coach on the floor. I think he's smart not to brand himself that way.
Yeah, I mean, I think anybody would be satisfied being Jay Wright's heir apparent because. Thank you very much. But let's talk about Jay Wright. Mike, you wrote about this a couple of weeks ago. Maybe it was a week ago. I don't know. Time is kind of a flat circle right now. You wrote about him staying at Mike Krzyzewski staying at Duke. You wrote about Jay Wright staying at Villanova. Let's say, and I know this is the annual conversation about Jay Wright, but let's say he wins his third national title in 6 years. He's got a team that is very senior laden and is at its maturity. Is there, from your experience with Jay, from your talks with him, from your talks with people around the program, is there a chance that after 2 decades and 3 national titles and 4 or 5 Final Fours, that he looks for a new challenge?
I don't think you can ever rule it out completely. Remember, before he coached at Villanova, Jay Wright coached at Hofstra. Mm-hmm. The New York media love him. He and his wife, Patty, enjoy the New York area. I think if there were ever an ownership change with the New York Knicks and James Dolan wasn't in charge of them anymore, that would give Jay a little bit of pause. But I also think that the longer he's at Nova and the more success he has there, the harder it's going to be for him to step away. The situation would have to be almost ideal for him to say, okay, you know what, I'm going to give this up, because the situation he has at Villanova is pretty much ideal. I mean, Mike and I were discussing this earlier this morning. Like, he's already the best college basketball coach in Philadelphia history. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And, he can maintain and take that mantle from Krzyzewski as the best coach in the sport and keep it. So, as I said, you never say never, but I would be really, really surprised if Jay Wright just didn't finish his coaching career at Villanova. I don't know how Mike Jensen feels about that.
I think there were stages where you didn't know. So there was a stage of his career before the national championships, and the key of it was before they built their practice facility on campus next to the arena, the Davis Center. If they didn't have that, he sort of forced their hand, and if they had not done that, I don't think he'd be there anymore. I think he would have taken that stage of his career. All the blue blood college programs were going after him. They still call, but they all called. Whether it was Kentucky, UCLA, they all called. They never got him, and it took that. Then it also took. He was not convinced. He thought they would have to move up to 1A football to stay relevant as the Power Five took over the sport. In that way, as it turned out, they got a little lucky even before the national championships, which weren't luck. But before that, the Big East changed, and that was his concern, was that they were going to fall to mid-majordom. But instead, Fox came along and needed programming, marquee programming. When the league split, they got the name, the Big East. They got the Garden for the Big East tournament. So they got Gus Johnson and Bill Raftery talking about the Big East at the Garden. Looks like the Big East, sounds like the Big East, and so it is the Big East. And then, the national championships cemented that there's no concern that you have to go somewhere else to win. It's as elite as any program. But I agree with Mike that he was an Olympic coach. So he's been around that cycle the last 5 years. Been around Popovich, Steve Kerr, and if that's your peer group, you might want to test yourself and say, well, let me see if I can do highest level what they did. And so the circumstances weren't quite right. The Sixers' circumstance was never quite right. He knew everything about the Sixers, I totally agree with Mike that if Dolan didn't own the Knicks, he might be the Knicks coach today. But now he's 60 years old, so it would have to be something absolutely perfect to get him to leave, and I don't think he's ready for retirement right yet.
One factor we haven't mentioned, Murph, is that think about Nova's place in kind of the Philadelphia constellation of sports, right? Like even if Nova were to lose a first round game as a 3rd seed or a 2 seed, Jay isn't hearing about that in our market for more than 24 to 48 hours.
Right.
Because by then, people have moved on to the, backup slot receiver that the Eagles have signed in free agency. And, what did Ben Simmons post on Instagram now? And you can't undersell that as a factor as to why Jay might want to stay at Villanova. He knows how good he has it.
Mm-hmm.
He knows his place and Villanova's place and college basketball place in kind of the ecosystem of Philadelphia sports. And it's a pretty advantageous one because his peers in college coaching, generally speaking, put up with a whole lot more criticism and scrutiny than he does.
Yeah. I guess the one question I have is, do you think there's any, again, as you've noted, there's a fairly prominent college basketball coach who will be sailing off into the sunset after this tournament. Are there any college programs you could see him? Is Villanova Duke now? Like, would Duke even be would Duke even be?
That's the point. Yeah.
I don't see him in a better college situation than the one he has right now.
Yeah, and again, obviously, money tends to have a voice and a place at the table.
Well, he's getting paid. I think he's the 3rd highest coach in college basketball right now and he moves up to 2nd behind Calipari when Krzyzewski retires.
Yeah, well, Lincoln Riley was getting paid too. But I'm with you. I can see why the NBA appeals to these guys at a certain stage of their career. I know Krzyzewski, was kind of a guy that never really seriously flirted with it. Did he? I don't know.
Yeah, Lakers.
Yeah, Lakers, Celtics. There were opportunities. He had multiple opportunities over the years. Even the Sixers, when Larry Brown stepped away in 2003, Billy King put in a call to Mike Krzyzewski, and Krzyzewski told him no. But if he had wanted the job, he would have been the Sixers coach in 2003, 2004.
Yeah, but I think the point is that he didn't want it. Maybe he did. I don't know, but I can see why these guys do want it. People that I've talked to have said Cal would love to get back into the NBA at some point.
And Krzyzewski, he scratched that itch with the Olympic team.
Right.
So he coached the best players in the world, the best team in the world at that time. He had Kobe and LeBron and a whole host of others. So he literally scratched that itch. I think the Lakers thing was real a little bit, and it was tempting, just as I'm sure Jay has been tempted.
Well, it's got to be hard. I mean, like Mike Sielski goes through it as the best sports columnist in America. If you need a new challenge at some point, and you go and write a book about Kobe. Jay Wright, 2 decades in one place is just something that people don't do. And they don't do it with nearly the success that he's had. And it's going to be fascinating to see where he goes from here. I would love it if he was 70 years old and still coaching on the main line there. And to Mike's point, he's got probably the lowest stress job in college sports. Is that for any big time coach?
I don't know about that because the stresses of he places a lot of stress. He's as crazy as the rest of them. He just wears it better.
Yeah, but in terms of pressure from your alumni base, from your fan, that's the stuff that college that just kills college folks. And the fact that he has this talent pipeline from this metro area. I understand Sielski's point that Jay Wright has it pretty good, but I am curious. There's a faction of Sixers fans that will remind you that Doc Rivers is by no means guaranteed another year at the helm. Mike Sielski, what do you think the odds are that Wright retires at Villanova, and what do you think the odds are that he kind of scratches an itch at some point?
I'd say it's about a 95% chance that he retires at Villanova.
Wow,
I really think so. Yeah.
That would be great. Jensen, you agree with that?
Yeah, a few years ago, I would have put it much lower. I might have put it at 70-30, but it just keeps inching up that way since it's just got to be a perfect situation. and even the Sixers would have to decide whether, that is the situation. Also, he, like most college coaches, is very much a control freak, and you don't control the pros.
From an entertainment standpoint, I mean, what would be the best Final Four matchup right now? The best championship matchup. I mean, what should I be rooting for as a viewer? Who do I want to see?
Well, same.
Well, yeah. Mike, I think we lost you, buddy.
I think we lost Mike Jensen's audio.
We'll get him back. Anyway, Mike, what do you think? I mean, from these teams that you've seen, who do you think the best for entertainment value? I mean, are we talking Arkansas? Are we talking about Purdue? Are we talking St. Peter's? Are we talking Duke Nova? What do we want to see?
Yeah, for me, Murph, you hit the nail there on the last one, and I know, maybe this is East Coast bias, but the fact is that Mike Krzyzewski is such a giant figure in the sport that the idea of having him go out winning a national championship is a narrative, a storyline that's very alluring. I can tell you, CBS and Turner Sports are rooting for Duke to get to the Final Four and to the national championship game. And then, of course, as you alluded to earlier, the prospect of Villanova with Jay Wright as kind of Krzyzewski's heir apparent as the guy in college basketball, with a team with familiar players. People know who Colin Gillespie is. People, not as many people, but people should know who Jermaine Samuels is. Villanova is now a blue blood program. I think that kind of matchup in the Final Four of the championship game is what CBS roots for. One of the things that gets lost in like tracking the popularity of March Madness and the Final Four is that viewers and fans want upsets early on, but then once you get to the Final Four, they want, the familiar teams. They want the names. They want the North Carolinas and the UCLAs and the Dukes and the Kentuckys and now the Villanova. So once you get to that point, it's all about storylines, I think. Unless you've got a team, to go back 30 years like the 1990 Loyola Marymount team that was just playing so differently from everybody else, or unless somehow St. Peter's manages to keep going and be the Cinderella of all Cinderellas, I think that Duke and Nova kind of carry the day when it comes to who people would want to see in that Final Four.
I think Jensen got voted off the island.
He was saying, "Yep, here we go."
It was like Rocky picking himself off the mat.
That's right.
I'm back.
I don't know if you heard any of that, Mike, but I'm curious. It's really hard this year, at least for me. You're kind of average casual college basketball fan. I mean, this is the first year it kind of feels real. It wasn't real at all. 2 years ago, didn't even happen. And last year, even then, it was like with COVID and just kind of all the balls in the air. This is the first time that I really kind of feel invested in a tournament. Since probably 2018 or 19, whatever that year was. So it's like it's easy to kind of overblow the upsets and the fact that we've got 1 seed remaining, 2 seeds remaining. But it really feels to me that like it's kind of anyone's ball game this year, and this is one of the zanier tournaments that I can remember just with regards to the top of the field. What has your take been? And can you kind of put it in perspective? I mean, how rare is it that we've only got 1 seed in the final, whatever it is, 12 teams? How rare is it that we only have, a 1 seed and 2 seeds? What has this tournament kind of been like, with the full knowledge that you've been kind of engrossed in Villanova?
Well, there's a reason for all that's happening, and it's all the things we've been talking about. You needed to have these veteran teams. So it used to be sort of easy. You just pick the pros, and those are the teams that would advance deep into it. But now you've got freshman pros versus fifth year. So you've got 17 and 18-year-old most talented players playing against 23-year-olds who know how to take advantage of you. So it's flipped the script completely, and we've seen that. in different ways. And so even without COVID, that's not the way to pick a tournament anymore, is to just, you don't have a Dwayne Wade I don't know if he played 3 years of college basketball at Marquette, but, taking them to the Final Four, that kind of thing is not the way it's happening. You get these 5th-year guards, 4th-year guards, and most of these teams left have those kinds of factors. So, picking it, you're asking the guy who picked Kentucky in his bracket to formulate how the rest of it's going to go. I mean, God only knows. I have no idea.
I was right there with you, brother. Kentucky was my pick for.
It's a good pick for an hour.
We did better than Charles Barkley, I guess. I think he had, or it was a Dick Vitale that had Iowa and Kentucky in the final. But
I had Iowa in the Final Four.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. My favorite play of the game last night was, I think it was a guy Sielski wrote about in his column, Jermaine Samuels. To Jensen's point, just a first step, beat a guy to the left, jump stop in the paint, and go up strong. And it's just like, that's coaching right there. That's experience right there. And you saw the opposite of it, every time down the court for Michigan in those last couple of minutes. It really is you really can see the kind of maturity differences in these players. I mean, Samuels was that Samuels who hit that shot?
Yes.
I mean, that's a man right there,
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, Murph. I think Mike would agree with this. The most impressive player we've seen so far against Villanova, the most impressive opposing player we've seen in the tournament so far, was Malachi Branham of Ohio State, who played himself, was probably already going to be a first-round pick and cemented that kind of with that second-round performance against Villanova. He was tremendous, really got Ohio State back in the game in the second half, but he's an 18, 19-year-old freshman, and you can see the physical difference between him and a Gillespie or a Samuels. And his talent is not so great yet that he's going to make up the difference for Ohio State against a team like Villanova that has that much experience on it.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
And Samuels wasn't doing those things 2-3 years ago.
Right.
He was a contributor. He was doing little things. He would have good games, bad games. He didn't have the total package that you described very well. And just as much the confidence to do it at these key times.
What's a guy like that scouting director you talk to? What's he saying about a guy like Jermaine Samuels? Because I have not watched a ton, but he seems like he has an NBA body.
Jermaine Samuels will play professional basketball for as long as he wants, but not necessarily in this country. He doesn't quite have the skill set, and there's no disrespect. I mean, in basketball, you can make 6 figures. And sometimes high figures, you can even make 7 figures overseas. So that cannot be dismissed. But that's more likely his path.
Yeah, I was actually just looking. Amari Spellman, I think, is over there in Korea right now. They're all these. I think Villanova is just kind of a feeder program for every league on every continent. But of this team, who's got the most pro potential, do you think?
It's interesting. I heard during the Big East tournament, I was listening to Jim Calhoun, the former UConn coach, talking about this, and he really liked Brandon Slater as a guy who, would have the body and the athleticism and all the traits that you'd want to play at the professional level, at the highest professional level. I'm not sure about that, but Calhoun's a guy who generally knows what he's talking about. Mike, I don't know what you think.
Oh no, Mike lost his voice again. We're getting to the end here anyway.
He just cut out on us early. He didn't want to hang anymore.
He's out of here. He's playing hooky. Sielski, I'll ask you before we cut out. From the players that you've seen in this tournament, who do you think has boosted his stock the most? Not just on Villanova, but everywhere. You mentioned that kid from Ohio State. It's a guy like Tyrese. I asked the question because a guy like Tyrese Maxey falls to the Sixers, at 21, and you got to think if he played in the tournament, there would have been a lot more exposure, and you would have seen a lot more eyes. We've seen guys like Durant, Wade, Lonzo Ball, De'Aaron Fox. You really kind of like see these guys rise to the top and kind of foretell their pro careers. in this tournament. Is there anybody that I should be keeping my eyes out for?
Yeah, I think Branham is the one guy.
Mm.
It's funny because Mike and I have been in kind of this tunnel with Villanova and haven't seen as much of the rest of the tournament as I think we would like to or able to. But Branham was really impressive, particularly because Ohio State was dead and buried against Villanova, and he really brought them back. It was the kind of performance that you see and you go, okay, that there's something there. I mean, he was Mr. Ohio basketball. He went to St. Vincent St. Mary. He's the first St. Vincent St. Mary player to be Mr. Basketball in Ohio since LeBron. And not to dwell on Villanova, but, Mike's point earlier about Colin Gillespie is a good one. That the more Gillespie plays, the more he kind of shows what he really is, as opposed to what people might think he is or stereotype him as. And so I think, a tournament like this can only help him.
Well, I don't know about you, but I think we should probably follow Mike Jensen's lead.
I agree.
And get out of here. What do you got the rest of the day? And is practice over? Have you written yet?
No, we'll have practice will be closed for both Villanova and Houston, but we'll have some availability coming up in about an hour. Villanova first, then Houston. I'm going to try to find Akeem Olajuwon, see if he'll talk to me about the Houston glory days.
Is he just walking around San Antonio? Or
I'm hoping. He was here last night for the Houston-Arizona game, so I'll see if I can find him playing one-on-one against David Robinson somewhere.
It sounds like a 2-for-1 column idea. Talk to him about Joel Embiid and keep that in your back pocket.
I like the way you think, Murph.
All right, man. Well, thanks for everybody for joining us. Tune in tonight as Purdue, UCLA, and North Carolina and St. Peter's, and then 4 other teams in the other region look to join Villanova and Houston in that Elite Eight. For now, I'm David Murphy, your host, Inquirer Sports columnist. This is Mike Sielski, Inquirer Sports columnist, and we'll see you later.